the army for the hard tasks ahead and to ensure the proper coordination of infantry and armour. The build-up of men and material continued steadily, and by October, 8th Army consisted of 10 fully equipped divisions, 3 of them armoured. Montgomery now possessed overwhelming material superiority, not only on the ground, but in the air as well. The Desert Air Force had been heavily reinforced, and Allied air power was further augmented by the dispatch of American Air Force units to the Middle East. This tilted the balance of air power decisively against the Axis. As the 8th Army completed its final preparations, Allied airstrikes on Rommel's assembly areas and lines of communication became almost incessant. The American M3 medium tank was hastily commissioned in 1940 as an interim measure to provide the American Army with a tank comparable to those possessed by European powers. The result was a curious hybrid, half-tank, half-self-propelled gun. The main armament was a 75mm gun mounted in a right-hand sponson with a restricted traverse and capable of firing both high explosive and armor-piercing ammunition. The fully rotating turret mounted a 37mm anti-tank gun and a coaxial machine gun. The M3 entered service with the 8th Army early in 1942 and was known as a Grant. Despite its strange configuration, high profile and comparatively thin armour, the Grant quickly proved superior to all other existing British tanks, though it still fell far short of the best German machines. The British 6-pound anti-tank gun entered service in 1941. Hitherto, the Army had relied on a 2-pound weapon, which had proved ineffective in France and virtually useless against German face-hardened armour in North Africa. Like many British weapons, the 6-pounder suffered lengthy delays between design and production, and when it finally arrived, it was already being overtaken by improvements to German armoured plate and by superior counter-engagement weapons. It also fired only uncapped shot, which had a tendency to shatter on impact. Nevertheless, the 6-pounder was a useful defensive weapon when dug in, and could defeat most German tanks at up to 1,000 yards. The 6-pounder's replacement, a 17-pound weapon, was already in production, but only a few of these would see service in North Africa. Entering service in 1937, the Hawker Hurricane was a remarkably good aircraft for its time and was the mainstay of the RAF's fighter squadrons during the Battle of Britain. But as a fighter, it quickly gave way to the Spitfire and was gradually re-equipped as a ground attack aircraft. The Mark II-C, which appeared in 1942, mounted 4 20mm cannons, and the D version, 2 40mm cannons and 2 machine guns. These aircraft were used extensively in North Africa against all sorts of targets, including shipping, supply columns and tanks. By October, Hurricanes equipped 13 squadrons of the Desert Air Force, and although not all were yet cannon armed, most were, and they were already sowing havoc behind the lines. The Eighth Army and its predecessor, the Western Desert Force, had fought under 6 different commanders in less than 2 years. Constant changes of command, endless restructuring, and the loss of thousands of their comrades in a succession of avoidable disasters had combined to bewilder and demoralize Eighth Army's officers and men. Yet if the army could be taught to believe in itself again, and was properly trained and prepared for the tasks ahead, Montgomery knew it had the experience, equipment, and manpower to win a decisive victory at Alamein. As the weeks passed, and it became clear that Montgomery knew his job and respected his soldiers, Eighth Army quickly recovered both its strength and its morale. Of those forces destined for French North Africa, fully 3/4 were American. In contrast to Montgomery's veterans, they were full of confidence and enthusiasm, but many had only been partially trained, and the American army still lacked cohesion and discipline. How they would perform in the field had yet to be seen. In August 1941, the German Africa Corps and the Italian 21st Corps were combined under unified command to become Panzer Group Africa. In January of the following year, the group was augmented by a further 2 Italian corps and 1 German mechanized division, and redesignated as Panzer Army Africa. Although theoretically a mechanized force, the Army's mobility was constrained both by chronic problems of supply and by its large Italian infantry component. Indeed, so great were the Army's demands and so meagre its resources that for long periods of time it was entirely dependent on captured enemy supplies and equipment. By August 1942, fully 85% of its transport consisted of British and American vehicles, and British rations, fuel, and even heavy weapons all played their part in sustaining the Panzer Army in the field. Yet despite these deficiencies, the Army remained a formidable fighting machine. Its German component and its overall German leadership, which gave it vigor and tactical flair in offense, would ensure commitment, resolution, and courage in the coming defensive battle. The Mark III was originally designed to a 1935 specification for a main battle tank, intended for armored combat. Mass production began in 1939, and the tank saw service in Poland and France. But the 37mm gun proved ineffective against Soviet tanks, and was soon replaced by a 50mm weapon. Armor thickness was also increased, and technical improvements made to the quality of the plate. Although the Mark III was progressively outclassed in the East and relegated to the role of support tank, huge numbers were sent to Africa, where they provided the bulk of the Africa Corps' armored strength. The Mark III Special entered service in 1942, and was the last significant version of the model. Mounting a long-barreled 50mm gun, face-hardened armor, and extra plates, the Mark III remained in production until 1943, and served with distinction throughout the African campaign. The Italian army entered the war with a tank totally unsuited to its prescribed